All right, Steve Says Boom fans. What are we going to talk about tonight? Um, my last video did contain some negative aspects about, current marketing and editorial policy. This post is going to have none of that. This post is going to take me down memory lane all the way back to those formative years where I was just beginning to piece together collecting characters. Yeah, the fun stuff. We all go through this period where we're not an expert, we're learning, we're listening, and we're grasping for information. The difference being back in the 80s to today, of course. Now, if you're a youngster, you just click that little button, or you're on your phone, and boom, you Google, you wiki, the information is there. Some of you who were there back in the early 80s, you know what I'm talking about. We didn't have that. We had to go about it a different way. And in a way, it was more fun. It was more like an exploration, like you were exploring this brand new world and you had to find pieces of information. Either speaking with someone who was more knowledgeable than you, going into a comic shop and finding a book, magazine, some sort of guide. So, with that being said, I had begun sort of collecting comics in the summer of 1983. Comics, I should put that in quotes. I had barely any money. I was just barely reading some stuff. I think I'd read a copy of The Thing #2. I'd read a copy of Avengers 247, which was totally incomprehensible to me. I'd read, an issue of Fantastic Four, 284, I think it was. Again, incomprehensible. But I was trying. And then what happened was this little story came out. This is a hardcover reprint of Marvel Superhero Secret Wars, which came out in the summer of 1984 for us over in England. And that story was massive. I mean, had all these characters in this, but I had no idea who they were. The story is written in a very clever fashion by Jim Shooter. He introduces you to the characters. Looking back on it now, it does seem overly wordy, overly plodding. But back then, it was the only way for someone like me to understand who was who. So in there, like in some of the panels, Dr. Octopus introduces himself as Dr. Octo Octavius. No one speaks like that. But in the comics, it worked, because now I knew who he was. I also found out, quite quickly that he was a member of Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery. And at that time, I was not reading Amazing Spider-Man. I realized I had a lot of catching up to do. I also didn't have a lot of funds. I just couldn't go and buy thousands of issues. Firstly, in my little area in England where I lived, we only had 2 places where you could buy comics. One place was a glorified newsstand with a guy in there that used to smoke a ridiculous amount of cigars. This was in Southend. Any of you in England know it was in Southend. And it was like above the train station. And he had an old school store, books, magazines, newspapers, but there was a nice little section of comics. About a year later to 2 years later, down below, a comic shop opened. And my world was opened beautifully. That's where I got my first issue of Marvel Superhero Secret Wars #1. So, there I was, full of curiosity, just bursting at the seams. It's like, I've got to find out who these characters are. I mean, I love the Hulk. I was already getting the Hulk. It was the only title that I was actually getting back issues for. Was the Hulk. I was a fanatic for the Hulk. But the Secret Wars had opened me up to these characters, like Galactus and Ultron and, Thor. I was like, oh my word. Where, who, when, why? I needed help. Now, luckily enough, I met a kid at school, and his name was Richard Smith, and he was like a guru. He was the only person I knew that had been to London, to Forbidden Planet, to buy back issues. And he came to school one day with a bag, just a plastic bag full of comics. They weren't even in bags and boards, they were just loose. Thinking about it now, it's like, oh, obviously these were not his collectible issues. They were just extras that he had. Extras, and it was a whole bag of comics. I was like, oh my God, look, there must have been 100 comics in there. I could barely afford 2 comics a month. Anyway, I was searching through his bag, and 2 comics stuck out to me, and they still stick out to me today. One was issue 291 of Thor, and that's the issue with the Eternals, and it's a massive issue. It's just huge. Roy Thomas, I think, scripting, with Keith Pollard doing the art. Of course, I had no idea who they were back at the time, but I was just like mesmerized by this issue. And the other issue he had was the official Handbook of the Marvel Universe, Book of the Dead. I pulled it out. This is a reprint of the issue that I saw, Book of the Dead. Okay? Look at that beautiful book right there. I was mesmerized. I was even more mesmerized by the fact that characters were dead. Couldn't they just be brought back? I had no idea that Marvel had all these rules and that editors and writers had to follow these things. If a character was dead, they just couldn't bring him back. I was like, wow, they have structure? You mean it's like a real world that I can look into? It's not just some sort of weird thing that goes on. It's a managed universe. When I was looking through that issue, I got to the entry where there's a nice picture of Thanos. I will always remember it because without knowing anything about his history, I was drawn to his look. I was like, oh my word, look at this character. Look how powerful he looks. This guy looks fantastic. And then Richard Smith, quite rightly, was like, well, he won't be coming back because he died. Adam Warlock killed him. You know, he'd be turned to stone, la 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 la. And I thought to myself, that's sort of a shame for the new generation of fans that are coming along not to be able to enjoy these characters. Sort of a shame. Anyway, that's just a sideline. The official Handbook of the Marvel Universe is still 1984. The big year for me was coming right down the pipeline, and that's basically the heading of this post, really. 1985, the year that changed my life in comics. 1985. A brand new deluxe version of the official Handbook of the Marvel Universe. Look at that book. It was 68 pages. All the entries had been completely redone and it had been expanded. Oh my word. That book, I was pouring through the characters, reading out of their little histories. I didn't have those issues. What I found fascinating was it told you their first appearances. I was like, oh my word. You know, what is this title, Journey into Mystery? What does that mean? Does it start at issue 1? All these questions were there. The curiosity was bursting inside me. I was like, oh my God. I had to find these special individuals at school, comic fans. I needed education. So if you can imagine a rather jock-looking type, you know, suddenly I'm searching around for the biggest nerds I could find. I found one kid. His name was Nick Kosh. He was such a quiet, unassuming kid, and he introduced me to this. This is the Overstreet price guide to comic books. 1985 version. Look at that. I went through this book with a fine-tooth comb. I was like, oh my God. It tells you all the titles, the publishers. It gives you a little history of all the Golden Age titles. Suddenly, I was becoming aware. Suddenly I realized that Thor didn't start off in Journey to Mystery #1. He first appeared as Journey to Mystery 83. Wow. I found out there was no Hulk #7. It was cancelled at issue 6. This book. And I went through and looked at the ad pages, and there was like little photographs of these stores in America. And one ad in particular, there's like, I just see someone's pulling out like an X-Men 4 or something. I was like, oh, these are, all the Americans are so lucky. Now they've got real stores. Or shops, as we were calling them. I went through that book with a fine-tooth comb. Again, no computer. I went through with a notepad and pen and wrote down every single Marvel title I went through. Of course, I didn't quite know the difference between Marvel comics of the 1940s, Timely, Atlas, and then Marvel again. It was very confusing. So I just wrote everything down. Everything that had Marvel, Timely, Atlas. And then I had to go through and go, oof, what's part of the so-called Marvel Universe? What is that? This book here had a nice list of all the titles that were part of the Marvel Universe. Titles that were canon. My education was growing. Every day I was learning something new, and I was being pulled more and more in. But I needed to know more. The official handbook of the Marvel Universe would give me the information on certain characters, places, artifacts, devices, and certain concepts. The official price guide had told me about the issue runs, so I knew what issues, how far they run. The prices didn't really mean much to me at the time because it was in dollars. And I knew that, at the time a Hulk #1 was like $600. I don't know how many pounds that would have been, but I knew that that was never going to happen at the time. So, 1985. I have the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, and I have the price guide. We're not finished. Marvel came out with a book called Marvel Saga. This is a reprint. This is basically the cover to issue 1. Marvel Saga was Marvel history, the first 10 years or so, in chronological order, where they had gathered the panels and put them together from different flashbacks and put them together. And suddenly I was like, oh my word. That means that a writer can come along 10 years after they've done a story, write something that takes place 10 years before. And it fits perfectly in. It slots in there. That's what's called continuity. Oh my word. How clever is that? Oh my God, who are these people who are in control of that? They must be comic gods. Their knowledge must be astounding to know all of this history. So I went through and looked at the people's names and began to look at people's names. Editors, who are these people? Certain names stuck out to me right away. The main writer, of course, of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe was a guy called Mark Grunwald. His assistant, of course, was Peter Sanderson. And I needed to know who these people were. And then the final piece of the puzzle arrived, also in 1985. The official Marvel Index, issue 1 featuring Amazing Spider-Man, which I can't tell you how much. It gives you a synopsis and all the character listings, issue by issue. Issue by issue. Telling you where the characters appeared, where they appeared next. It was a treasure trove of information. In the back, it had a list of terminology. He explains about continuity, chronology, flashbacks. Flashbacks are something forwards. Flashback to something that hasn't happened. Cameo appearances. Oh my word, 1985. Look at this. In 1985, I was suddenly aware. And I was also technically in hell. because I wanted it all. I wanted it all. I looked at my list and I realized that, okay, the Golden Age Captain America didn't really have much relation at the time to the Silver Age Captain America that had appeared in Tales of Suspense and in Captain America 100. So I was able to scratch those books off my list. It was more difficult with the Atlas because, some of the Atlas titles sort of morphed into Marvel and then they became superhero books. And some of those Atlas books had pre-hero characters in there. Fin Fang Foom and Groot and Taboo and Blip. Very confusing. It's like, what's this cutoff? What's Marvel? What's not? Even to this day, sometimes I look at an issue and go, do I need that issue? Or is it really not canon? I want to name some names here. So, of course, this book here is Robert Overstreet. Robert Overstreet had been in the press guide since 1970, and his team of advisors. I looked at his team of advisors and like, oh my word. In here, believe it or not, there's a listing here for Classics Illustrated. I looked at the listing and I was just amazed. I was like, who found out all that information? Who went to the trouble? How did they know that one issue had 13 reprints? I was astonished by it. And I realized that not all people are equal. There's gods and there's comic gods. And I was like, one day I want to be one of those comic gods. I want to know as much as those guys. At first, I will admit I did not think of myself ever being able to write or produce anything for the Overstreet. My first thought was being an index writer. No, I was not going to become an artist. I had tried and I wasn't very good. For some strange reason, I wasn't interested in writing superhero stuff. I don't know why. I just felt that without being able to draw it, it was unfulfilling. However, the official Marvel Index, I went through and looked at all the credits, and it was written by a guy called George Olszewski. And I was like, wow. I found out some information about him. There was an article in Comics Interview, I think it is, where they explain who he is, where he came from. And I thought to myself, I was like, wow, at some point this index series is going to go on and on and on. They're going to want people coming in and being able to help. The audacity of it. I had less than 200 books in my collection, and there I am thinking of myself assisting George Olszewski on his indexes. Funny thing is that a little while afterwards I was in a store and I found these two things here, which is the original Marvel Index. These two issues were widely available because they were distributed through a company called Pacific. The Daredevil and X-Men. And I went through those with a fine-tooth comb. And then I found out that there was a whole host of other issues which were really hard to find in England. Really hard. I couldn't actually find most of them until I came to the States. But a lot of the names that appeared in there, including there was some Peter Sarnas and stuff, of course, all appeared later on in the official Marvel Index. So, armed with all this information, what was I going to become? I was going to become this great comic indexer. I was going to put together a complete Marvel set. I was going to know everything. And I thought to myself at some point, well, maybe if Robert Overstreet retires, I can also help out with the guide. Oh, my word. When you're young, you can really... Your dreams are unstoppable. So, years later, when I became an advisor to the Overstreet, I told that story to Robert Overstreet, and he had a big laugh to himself. His wife was also really laughing at my story. Unfortunately, I've never met George Olszewski. The index series did not last forever. It only went on until 1988. Some of that stuff is still the finest indexing that's ever been done. I had a major idea to become an indexer in the 1990s, but with the advent of the internet, it seemed a rather moot point. But I still have boxes and boxes of reference material that I was creating for my index series. But anyway, I just wanted to give you some insight into a younger version of me, someone who was insatiably curious, and I found the pieces and put them together, and it made my hobby so much the better. In a time with no computers, just print. 1985. If any of you guys were there back in the time, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about, and you're probably laughing to yourself right now, like, yes, I read those books. It did the same thing for me. If you're a youngster, and the 1980s is some weird, far off, distant time, because you were born in the 1990s or 2000s, you're probably like, wow, whoopie-doo. I can just type it into my smartphone. Which is true. It's true. However, this has been a lot of fun for me, going down memory lane, and this is one of the reasons why I love doing these videos. I hope you can sense my enthusiasm for this, and if you ever get a chance, take a look at the official Handbook of the Marvel Universe, especially the Deluxe series. Of course, The Secret Wars is a must. If you haven't read that series by now, it's available in trade paperback and, of course, hardcovers. Marvel Saga is available, of course, in this version here, which is the Essentials. I don't think it's ever been released in any other format. Luckily enough, the first edition of the official Handbook of the Marvel Universe, Volume 1, has been reprinted in this beautiful hardcover. If you get a chance, oh, I love this book. Get a chance to read those. And if you're into the history of it, search up these. The Marvel Comics Index, George Orchevsky from the 1970s and early 1980s. They're around somewhere, maybe on eBay or whatever is some stores. But have fun out there, and hopefully you are on your own comic journeys. Boom!